Hello everyone, and once again, this is Die Hard Gamer, and today we are going to be taking a look at Castlevania II: Simon's Quest for the Nintendo Entertainment System, otherwise known as the NES. This game originally came out for the Famicom Disk System as Dracula II: The Accursed Seal. What's the Famicom Disk System, you ask? Well, it was basically a floppy disk-based add-on for the Nintendo Famicom. And you could basically play games on floppy disks on there, and you could also save your progress on games like the original Castlevania, which is known as Akumajo Dracula in Japan, the original Metroid, as well as this game, and I think you could also save your progress on the Japanese version of Kid Icarus as well, since that was another game that came out for the Famicom Disk System, as well as the now quite legendary, I guess you could call it, Doki Doki Panic, which became our version of Super Mario Bros. 2 here in the US. Instead of having a battery backup, they chose to go for a password system, which honestly I think wasn't the very best idea in Konami's case, unfortunately. So here we are in the town of Jova. This is where you will be coming back to the game later on. The music for both versions of this game was composed by Kenichi Matsubara. And some of his music from this game have become really popular in the Castlevania series later on. Especially this song right here, Bloody Tears. Castlevania II is one of those games where you're either going to end up liking it, or you're probably going to end up not liking it and really hating its guts. One of the different aspects of the game, as you saw right there, is the day-to-night system, which will get pretty annoying after a while, but you get used to it later on. Also in this game, hearts count as currency. They basically count as money, where in other Castlevania games they count as ammo for your sub-weapons. basically, the story of this game is that after Simon Belmont had supposedly defeated Dracula at the end of the original Castlevania, Dracula placed a curse on Simon Belmont, and then Simon Belmont started getting ill, he started getting sick, and later on he found out that Dracula had placed a curse on him, and that he needs to go around the 5 mansions of Transylvania collecting Dracula's body parts just so that he can go back to the ruins of Castlevania, burn all of the body parts that he collected, resurrect Dracula just to kill him again. To use an analogy from the AVGN, the Angry Video Game Nerd, that's basically, try to imagine Batman killing the Joker, spreading all of his body parts throughout Gotham City. Then Batman comes back to Gotham City just to collect his body parts. Then he has to fight the Joker again. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but for whatever reason, that's what Konami decided to go with when they decided to come up with a story for this game. It basically makes as much sense as trying to make sense out of the Metal Gear franchise, let me tell you. So now we have the white crystal and we also have the holy water. The holy water will be used for basically trying to basically trying to find out which parts of the floors in the mansions are actually solid floor and which of them are pitfalls, basically. So I just basically wasted a good amount of my money buying the white crystal and the holy water, so we gotta go back here just to earn more money so that we can end up buying a thorn whip. You don't have to go and buy the thorn whip, you can just go ahead and skip it and go right to the next town and buy the chain whip, which is basically one of the more powerful whips in the game. But the thorn whip does end up helping you out. Because all we've got right now is the leather whip. And as you can also see, there's a time a timer, I guess you can say. There's basically a time limit in this game, and you also earn experience like you do in most other RPGs like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. Of course, the more experience you get, the more you level up. And there is a leveling system in this game, as you just saw. And also, we have enough hearts to go back into the town of Jova and buy ourselves a Thorn Whip. Also, all of the enemies are stronger at night, too. So, basically, we're going to go back to the town of Jova and fight zombies until the morning comes again. And by the look of those sprites, they don't look like zombies, but trust me, they're zombies. And you can't go into the, any of the residence places. You can't even go into the church at night to heal yourself, because that basically makes a whole lot of sense with all of the monsters terrorizing Transylvania. Castlevania II got a lot of flack for doing a lot of different things, much like Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link got a lot of flack for trying to experiment and do things different from the original Legend of Zelda. And depending on who you ask, Castlevania 2 as well as Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link still get quite a bit of flack for trying to do things different in the sequels. Okay, we have enough hearts to buy ourselves the Thorn Whip now. After that little bit of grinding we did. Also, if you played the Japanese version of this game, Dracula 2: The Accursed Seal, for the Nintendo Famicom, which came out on the Famicom Disk System, as I already mentioned previously, the music in this game sounds different in that version because of the fact that the Famicom Disk System was able to basically have another sound channel. Also, Konami came up with another sound chip, the VRC6 memory chip, to add an extra dimension of sound to the Japanese version of Castlevania III on the Famicom. But, of course, when those games were brought over here to North America, the soundtracks for those games had to be redone because the NES wasn't capable of having any additional sound channels or additional sound chips in the cartridges, unfortunately. And that was a weird glitch right there. And we're just a little bit short of 150 hearts, which means that we gotta go back and do more grinding. Hooray, more grinding, right? Because that was a common thing in RPGs back then. It still is, but not as much as it was back in the 80s and the 90s. So we're gonna go back here and grind for more experience. We're gonna go back to that town that we were in and get ourselves some more experience. And the enemies in this town are somewhat stronger at night. So, if you have the leather whip, and you come to this town when it's nighttime, you're basically gonna get yourself beat up quite a bit. But the good thing about the day-to-night mechanic in this game, even though you have to read the same block of text over and over and over again, is that you have a better chance of gaining experience as well as the amount of hearts that you'll need to buy certain items at night. And since this is an action-adventure RPG, and that there are RPG mechanics in this game, you have to follow everything right down to the T. You have to get all of the objectives right so that you're basically sure that you're not missing anything. Playing this game for the very first time, they drop you right into the town of Jova with no hints, no explanation of what to do or where to go. You basically have to figure it out. With sites like GameFAQs as well as unofficial Castlevania fan sites, that's really easy to do now. Back then, when we didn't have the internet, your only source of information was the second issue of Nintendo Power magazine. It was one of those kinds of games. It was a Nintendo Power kind of game. So we're almost up to 300 hearts. We have enough to get the, we have enough hearts to buy the chain whip now. And let me tell you, I was one of those people that rented this game for a weekend, and I didn't know what to do, I didn't know where to go, and I also didn't have the second issue of Nintendo Power back then, so this game kind of put me off. And also, it doesn't help matters that, this was the very first game that James Rolfe, as the Angry Nintendo Nerd, now known as the Angry Video Game Nerd, reviewed 13 years ago now. And even though the Angry Video Game Nerd is just a character, which is something that a lot of people out there forget to take into account, they take everything that James says as the nerd character as fact, which is definitely not good. So we've got everything that we need to go into the first mansion, the Berkeley Mansion. This is where you will be introduced to the mechanics of the mansions. And if you didn't have the white crystal, that platform would not be there. So it's very important to buy the white crystal as soon as you can when you start the game. Your goal here in the mansions is to basically find yourself the merchant who sells you an oak stake, buy said oak stake, then use it on this glowing crystal ball or this flashing orb or whatever you want to call it. And right now, I have to be very careful because I'm on my last life. And you're probably asking yourself, Die Hard, what happens after your last life? Well, you basically get a game over. And yeah, game overs aren't things that exist anymore nowadays in gaming, but back then, game overs were very well known. And after you get a game over and you decide to continue, all of your experience as well as all of those hearts that you earned, you basically have to earn them all over again. And if you think those blobs that go from the top to the bottom are annoying, oh my goodness, just wait until you meet these versions of the skeletons that basically jump backwards when you try and hit them and throw bones at you. Oh my god, those are the most annoying enemies in the game. And also, there's a certain way that you have to jump in order to get to this next section of the solid ground. playing in this game for the first time, it'll take you more than a couple of tries to get the hang of the jumping mechanics, as well as trying to get to that other piece of solid ground. And right here is where we find the merchant to buy the oak stake. Be very, very careful here. A very important tip, by the way. Do not, and I repeat, do not have the oak stake selected by accident. You always want to have the holy water selected first, because you don't want to end up accidentally using the oak stake by mistake, by accident. Because if you do that, you have to go back here and buy another oak stake, which is really not going to be great. Oh, great. That was not a smart move on my part. If you end up falling through one of the pitfalls, you basically are going to have to backtrack, which is not fun. And that was one of the things that led to the term Metroidvania in the future Castlevania game, Symphony of the Night. I'm almost out of health. That is not a good sign. Also, when you're in the mansions, time stops for whatever reason, which I think is very weird. When you're traveling throughout Transylvania, time basically moves like it does in real life. But whenever you enter one of the mansions, they just decided to have time stop and have it at a complete standstill, which is very weird for a Castlevania game. And I just managed to get out of that area by the skin of my teeth. already have the oak stake, so we don't have to worry about buying ourselves another oak stake unless we accidentally waste our oak stake. Also, when you're playing this game for the very first time, you will be spending a whole lot of time throwing holy water just to make sure which is an actual piece of the floor as well as which area is a pitfall. You now possess Dracula's rib. Possess. The broken English. That was another reason why this game got a lot of flack, is basically because of the broken English and the bad translation when the game was brought over here to North America. Oh. And I just lost all of those hearts as well as all of the experience that I had. Yay me. Now, what you want to do here is go along the bottom. Don't try and go along the top area because that's where the pitfalls are. This is also the first game in the Castlevania series to have multiple endings. This would be repeated in Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse, and that wouldn't happen again until Dracula X: Rondo of Blood, which was exclusive to the PC engine over in Japan for many years until it was ported to the PlayStation Portable as an unlockable for the Dracula X Chronicles. Okay. We basically defeated the first mansion, Berkeley Mansion. Now we're going to take on the second mansion here, Rover Mansion. But before we do that, we gotta make sure that we have the right items. And before I forget, the multiple endings part wouldn't happen again. Yeah, I already mentioned I already mentioned Rondo of Blood, but that also happened in the sequel to Rondo of Blood, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Symphony of the Night is the Castlevania game which gave birth to the Metroidvania style of Castlevania games that would follow in the years to come. Those flying eyeball enemies are just gonna keep respawning, so we need to take them out. Castlevania II Simon's Quest wasn't a good introduction to the Castlevania series, at least in my opinion. Because, like I mentioned, I didn't have the second issue of Nintendo Power back then, so my first official introduction to the Castlevania franchise was, of course, the first prequel, Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse. And right here is where you get one of the more important and more powerful items of the game, the Sacred Flame. Of course, Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse, like I already mentioned, being the first prequel in the series. First of many prequels, by the way. That game is really, really tough. And the reason why it's really, really tough is that Konami, here in America, basically decided to ramp up the difficulty. Because back in the days of when Blockbuster Video and rental stores were still a thing, Konami basically decided to ramp up the difficulty on some of their games, like The Adventures of Bayou Billy, and this game, Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse. Because Konami basically didn't want the kids to... They basically didn't want the kids renting the game to finish the game in one sitting during their entire weekend. And also the Japanese versions of The Adventures of Bayou Billy and Castlevania III, known as Mad City and... goddamn eyeballs. Anyway. Supposedly, the Japanese versions of Castlevania III and The Adventures of Bayou Billy, known as Mad City, and The Legend of Demon Castle, are supposedly easier. And I just went the wrong way. You're not supposed to go there until you have the blue crystals, so I think we're gonna have to do some more backtracking. Also, Dracula's whip, or not Dracula's whip, Dracula's rib also counts as a shield for you to block fireballs from incoming enemies. Ugh. Respawning enemies. You gotta love respawning enemies, right? Then the next game that I got to experience in the Castlevania series was, of course, Castlevania II Belmont's Revenge, which is the sequel to the Castlevania Adventure, or Castlevania the Adventure, whatever you want to call it. And I got that game as a Christmas present one year. Spent a whole lot of time playing that game. Was definitely one of the more challenging Castlevania games. Not as challenging as Castlevania III Dracula's Curse, I'll tell you that. And here you have an example of the just bad translation to this game. It gave us a clue about Dracula's eyeball, which is the next item that we need to get in the second mansion coming up. Also, this is one of the towns that doesn't have a church, so if you're here looking to heal yourself and you're expecting a church, then you need to go back to one of the other towns. Okay, we got ourselves some garlic as well as some laurels. Both items will definitely come in handy. Laurels will make you invincible for a brief amount of time, and that'll definitely help you out when it comes to the poisonous slumps throughout the game. And there's one more item that we need to get here before we leave this town. Oh, scratch that, because we're gonna have to fight more zombies. So, going back to my experience with the Castlevania franchise, after Belmont's Revenge on the original Game Boy, which was one of the games where you didn't have to fight death before you fight Dracula, because of the Game Boy's limitations. Basically, a Game Boy cartridge can hold up to 8 megabits of memory. But anyhow, after Belmont's Revenge, the next Castlevania game that I bought was, of course, Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the original PlayStation. That game took me a long time to beat. And of course, as I mentioned previously, that was the game that gave birth to the Metroidvania style of Castlevania games for future games. And this was also during the time where voice acting came into play. And voice acting was in its infancy back then. And a lot of people out there, they're kind of mixed on the voice acting for Symphony of the Night. It's another one of those instances where you're gonna like it or you're gonna find it cringeworthy. One of the cringeworthy examples of voice acting is, of course, the original Resident Evil for the Sony PlayStation, of course. And also, Symphony of the Night was where the Castlevania series went full-on RPG. Okay, so we exchanged our white crystal for blue crystal. So now we get to go back to that area that we were at previously. So if you use some garlic in the cemetery, basically you can get yourself the silver knife right there. And you're probably asking yourself, Die Hard, does this game have any bosses? It does, but not very many bosses, unfortunately. Which is kind of odd for a Castlevania game, because Castlevania games are really well known for their bosses. eyeball. And here we are at the Rover Mansion, the second mansion of the game. And we also got ourselves just enough experience to basically get ourselves up to level 2, in other words, which also increases our health bar. So first thing we gotta do, of course, is get ourselves the oak stake in this area, in this mansion. Symphony of the Night ended up becoming one of my favorite video games of all time, along up there with the original, well, most of the Metal Gear Solid games, except for Metal Gear Solid 5, but I won't get into that. And Symphony of the Night is a pretty long game. It's not one of those games where you're going to be able to finish it in one sitting. No way. Okay, that was not a very good idea. Okay, we got the oak stake for this mansion now. Then after that, I bought Castlevania Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness. Lament of Innocence being the very first game in the Castlevania franchise canonically, and Curse of Darkness being the sequel to Castlevania III Dracula's Curse on the NES. And basically you have a certain amount of time that you have in order to get all 5 parts of Dracula, go back to the ruins of Castlevania, resurrect him, and then defeat him again in order to get rid of the curse, as well as get the best ending to the game. I'm not gonna spoil the endings because those are basically something that you need to experience for yourself, pretty much. You now possess Dracula's heart. Possess. Now, unlike Dracula's rib, which basically counts as a shield, Dracula's heart doesn't do much. Except for this one area later on in the game. Oh, this is not a good combination right here. There we go. That's another annoying part of the game, is this camera that they had, that they decided to make for this game. It's not that much of a problem, but it can be a little bit of a hindrance at times. And of course, now that we have Dracula's heart, we gotta go all the way back to where we came. Just to get out of here. So, there you have it, the first 2 mansions in Castlevania II: Simon's Quest for the Nintendo Entertainment System, also very well known as the NES. Ugh. I'd like to thank you guys for checking out this gameplay video. If you liked what you saw, please feel free to hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment. What are your favorite Castlevania games, and how did you experience the Castlevania franchise? And if you're wondering what Konami is up to nowadays, well, they're making pachinko machines. Yes, you heard me right. They're making pachinko machines. This comes after the fact that there was a whole fiasco between Metal Gear franchise creator Hideo Kojima and Konami, but I'm not gonna get into that, because that's a whole different story. Konami isn't very well known for game development nowadays, unfortunately. And I'll just leave it at that. Be sure and check out my Twitch channel, which is at twitch.tv/diehardgamer1983. I usually stream on there Thursday through Saturday, rather, at 10 p.m. Mountain Pacific, which is basically 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time if you're living on the East Coast. Also, be sure and check out Nerd Vision Radio, which is, of course, my own radio station where I play the best music from anime, video games, and tokusatsu. I don't have a website up for it just yet, but I will post the link to it occasionally on my Twitter, which is at twitter.com/Super Sentai Fan. Be sure and follow me there for updates on when I'm about to go live on my Twitch channel. I will occasionally post the link in order for you fine folks to listen to Nerd Vision Radio that way. You can listen to it on Windows Media Player, Foobar 2000, Winamp, iTunes. You can also listen to it on your smartphone on the go where you're traveling. Or if you're working out or anything like that. So, with all of that out of the way, I'm not 100% sure about what I'm going to do for my next gameplay video. I might post a poll on my Twitter about that. Anyway, until next time, this has been Die Hard Gamer signing out.